This is a memoir that I'm writing, and it's kind of amazing because when you do memoirs, um, you're digging into the dark recesses of your mind and bringing them to light, and you're going, "Whoa, I didn't know that about me. Is that me?" And certain things that you just knew, all the little bits and pieces of your life, they suddenly started coalescing together. And suddenly things were making sense because I always wondered, how did I get polio in northern Minnesota in a town of 220 on the border of Canada? And polio was eradicated. So I kind of solved this problem on my own doing my memoirs. So here goes. And it's called, this is the polio chapter of my memoirs. In August of 1962, I was riding my bike over the black, shiny, jagged rocks in our alley road. I just finished raking for a neighbor at a big gray house. The reward was a cupcake. My parents earned a little extra money for new school clothes, including shoes, by picking potatoes. We wore no shoes all summer long. My mother never wore shoes, even in the winter. Around the house and yard, she was barefoot. She would put on her shoes to visit or go shopping. There were no sandals or flip flops then. The soles of our feet were like leather, and I could walk off on the black, jagged rocks in the alley. I snagged this memory because it is the day I became ill from contracting polio. After a day of raking the yard, I arrived home and the babysitter was there. I told her I didn't feel good and I threw up. She had me lay down and I fell asleep. Momentous occasions snap pictures in one's mind. Amazing how much detail is remembered. I remember waking up in the bedroom upstairs I shared with my sisters. I saw a big scary hand on the wall by my bed. I was terrified. It was God's hand. I was sure. I felt guilty playing hooky from school at the time Mrs. Lee babysat me when most of the town were picking potatoes. In fact, Reverend Lee picking behind my mom unbeknownst to her. She was joking with a woman friend about a subject matter that was private. He commented behind her, laughing to her horror. That story was told and eventually laughed at quite a few times. Well, anyways, I decided to skip school, and where do I go? Yep, you guessed it, the school playground. Needless to say, I was caught red-handed, and Mrs. Lee asked me to up to her room. She talked to me about the gravity of what I'd done, lying, forging a note that I was sick. I would rather have been yelled at and spanked than talking it out. We had to read the Bible and discuss it. Thinking back on my life, I got into lots of trouble. I had an imagination. Where did I get the idea of forging a note at 8 years old? Well, my mom was mortified. Both of my parents let it go because they could see by my reaction I already suffered enough. My husband's friend wanted me to speak at his meeting with his Rotary Club that is eradicating polio around the world. He asked me to speak about my experiences with polio. I just received my new flip phone with a feature called Google. I am not an early morning person, and it was 6 a.m. and had an hour drive to his meeting. Meanwhile, I typed in polio in the search, and I was amazed at how much information was at my beck and call. I did not want to know about polio syndrome. That was affecting polio survivors, so I purposely avoided the subject. In that short trip, I realized there was a polio epidemic in the 60s from Sabine live serum. There were more than one strain, and polio was still not eradicated. I did a quick brush up, and I thought I managed to give an intelligent speech. I had no idea I could do that before 7 a.m. Wow, did I do that? Later on that year, I believe I may have picked up the polio virus on the same monkey bars, slide, or merry-go-round. Could be my payback time. The second set of immunizations was given at our northern Minnesota school. I had a great fear about getting immunizations at the school. They hurt. I had a vivid imagination and I was a screamer. Well, the first polio immunization was a needle shot. That did hurt. The second set was the Sabine immunization or oral poliovirus vaccine, which was a live serum, a sugar water drink. But we also had to have a blood test prick, which by my screams you would have thought my finger was cut off. Well, miracles happen in my life once in a blue moon. I could stay home from school for half a day. Didn't have to get a shot. Yep, you guessed it. To celebrate my freedom from needles and pain, I ran to the school playground. The live serum infected us through the feces from children swallowing the vaccine. Kids didn't wash their hands as much in those days. Later, I found out the immunizations were expensive, and with 4 girls, it added up. My parents probably thought that in a town of 200 people in the North Woods, polio was not a threat. They were wrongly told that. Polio was eradicated. City schools were given immunizations at no charge to parents, unlike the smaller towns. How unfair, because I keep meeting people my age with polio. One gal was my former boss's wife in a northern Wisconsin town. Small towns were economically depressed and didn't generate the revenue to offset the cost of them. The first outbreaks of polio were from the wild strain. Many of us contracted polio from this live strain in the 60s. This was a hush-hush. The new epidemic wasn't in the newspapers and kept on the down low. Money, I bet. My doctor from Gillette Hospital later told me I was the last case of polio in the Midwest. I believed him until I would meet people my age that also contracted polio. So God's hand. Well, back to my vision of God's hand on the wall. My sister was sleeping next to me and I attempted to wake her because I was scared. It didn't work. Eventually my fear gave way to being comforted by staring at God's hand. It seemed to say, you can hold my hand if you are scared. I must have dozed off and awoke in my normal fashion, leaping and running down the flight of steps and noticing the bananas on the kitchen counter across the room. As I was running to them, my legs collapsed, right there on the kitchen floor. My parents were terrified. They called old Doc Brink and Badette and told him I collapsed. He said, bring her in immediately. He suspected, I bet. He probably saw polio in the 1950s. Meanwhile, I was eating a banana and enjoying it. He delivered my 3 sisters, but not me. I ended up being born in a neighboring town because my mom brought her mother her famous award-winning homemade angel food cake. Yep, my first birthday cake was a Valentine's Day cake. Yep, I came quick. She told me it took 40 minutes to get to the hospital, even gunning it. She remembers a shot in the arm and going up to heavenly voices. Well, I smile when I write this. I always thought I was heaven sent. Well, it was the drugs they pumped into new moms those days. Yep, I was born a druggie. The heavenly music was a choir singing at a Valentine's Day party at the hospital. Going up in an elevator, probably the only one in 40-mile radius, gave my mom the sensation of flying upward. Well, I had the spinal tap to determine polio. I still remember how painful that was. Doc Brink ordered an ambulance to drive me 380 miles through the North Woods south to Sister Kenny Institute. Time was not on my side. Polio virus was raging through my body. Sooner I got there, the more muscles I saved. Sadly, no freeway then, 2 lanes most of the way. Well, I was 8 years old and I didn't realize this. I was on a great adventure. I never saw an ambulance, which you didn't see in our small town. I was seated in the back on a litter and chauffeured. The first town we came to, the sirens blared. Wow, cool! I felt like this was better than being the queen in our small town Potato Day parade. I was the main event. Lots of towns to keep me happy. We finally arrived at Sister Kenny. I told them I had to go to the bathroom. I almost jumped off the table, not aware of my paralysis. The next thing I remember is dark, a dark place. I probably was drugged. I remember lying down in an enclosed bed, and my head was on the outside, and there was a little mirror. Years later, I figured I was in an iron lung. I was there about 6 months, and then I came up into the light in a sunny ward with other girls. I can't imagine my parents going through this. My mom told me years later a preacher came and read the last rites over me. I am so glad that didn't happen to me when I was a mom. I do not remember this dark time. I have more good, happy memories of Sister Kenny. And I'm going to stop right here. I still have a lot more, but this is a memoir that I'm focusing on what is it like to have a person with polio. And I lived it, and I describe all the exercises and what it took. And I remember Sister Kenny and the people that work there. I even remember their looks. Um, and I think it's kind of an interesting thing, and I would like to publish my memoirs. I'm hoping on this polio because I think people need to know a little bit more about um, people with disabilities. So, Happy New Year's! Thank you.